Welcome to the Existential Society in Melbourne, Australia. Existentialism is an umbrella term covering diverse and often conflicting schools of thought. Consequently, we are not agreed on who or what is an existentialist. We simply agree to disagree. I'm David Miller, Secretary of the Existential Society, and our speaker today is Dr. Themi, and his topic is Bataille, Blanchot and Lacan with Sade's problem of evil. And following Tim's presentation, there'll be the opportunity for you all to ask questions, make comments, and discuss the issues. Tim, over to you.
Thank you, David, and thank you for having me for a third occasion to the Existentialist Society of Melbourne. Now, the topic, Bataille, Blanchot and Lacan with Sade's, the Marquis de Sade's problem of evil. So let's start off firstly by explaining what Bataille means by evil. Because he is not a theological man, he's not a religious man, he's an atheist, and he's a materialist. In fact, Sartre told him off, why are you using the word sin in your work when you're not, if you're not Christian, there's no sin. If you're not religious, why are you using it? And there's a reason. And it's the same with the word evil. It's because he's saying what these words are usually used to designate is something in the material world, which does have a kind of a negative connotation, no matter how positive we try to be about everything that we see in the material world or in nature. To say that nature is all good or sex is all good, it's all positive, would be to deny these peculiarly negative parts that give us problem, right? And then there's the notion that we try to reduce society, politics, our arts, our literature especially for this presentation. Sometimes we make the mistake of trying to reduce it to the good or chain it up to a notion of the moral good. Typically linked to what's useful, to utility. And the problem with this is that it leaves out a kind of a complementary need for us to not be good, to be useless, to engage in waste, to engage in non-productive expenditure. And this was typically the stuff of religion, pre-Platonic, pre-Christian Platonic religion, the time for the festival, the time for the ritual, the sacrifice, or the dancing and the song and the hallucinogens or the alcohol. But for us, usually this stuff, and we still have our festivals, our games, games is very important too. But a lot of the more violent stuff, you don't go to a festival and see an animal slaughtered live or a human slaughtered live like the Aztecs did on the pyramids. But you might read some literature or watch a movie where, geez, there's a lot of violence going on in that one. And also we might see literature or see movies or where there's a lot of perverse sex going on as well. So there's always this sort of need for the useless is what there's a point Bataille's trying to make, and he's saying that's what Sartre kind of kept missing during his advocacy of communism, where he wanted to sort of get rid of the consumerist society and do what Stalin was doing, the productive society, everything productive, and the arts will be there to serve and encourage people to be productive and towards the good, what's useful to the good. But then then Bataille notices an inconsistency in Sartre too, and says, but later on, in this book he's looking at, he goes, Sartre is also referring to Stalin's society as a society of ants, his productive society as a society of ants. Like it's, geez, they're just like robots, you know, like cogs in a machine. It's too much. So, and as Bataille puts it, there's more fluidity in Sartre than he sometimes makes out. Now, let me see, am I able to switch this to a speaker view by any chance, David? Like I've got
Yeah.
your face like is sort of like on the whole screen, so I'm looking at your reactions too closely. Is there a way to sort of put it on speaker view?
Well, at the top of the screen, there's a thing that says view. You click on
Yeah,
that, right
yeah,
hand top, and
right
it
hand
should
top.
allow you to either be gallery or
Oh,
speaker
yeah, that
view.
one. Gallery. Okay, there's the gallery. Oh, now I can see there's actually quite a number of people here. Hello, everyone. Nice to see you. Um, yeah, I had it on speaker view, but whenever I speak, I'm still seeing you. So you must be there as the main speaker or something, even when you're not speaking.
Well, you've been on screen ever since we started the
For everyone else.
thing. Yeah,
Okay.
so you will be being recorded
Yeah.
as the speaker
All
view.
right, what I'll do, I'll just switch it to gallery view, then that way I can see everyone at once, which will be more balanced
Yeah.
gauging of people's reactions. Okay, thank you.
Great, good.
Now, so we come up with like structured outlets for our need to be useless or wasteful or evil to engage in these so-called evil drives, which in certain contexts are genuinely evil, you know, like murder and betrayal and theft, imprisonment, false imprisonment, all sorts of stuff that Sade mentions, all sorts of crimes. And we say, okay, things that are not okay in real life, they're okay in literature, right? Or in certain contexts, right? As Bataille puts it, that thou shalt not kill. It's a fundamental law. Murder is wrong. Except for, and then, you get all those moments where it's like, okay, self-defense, a just war, maybe some executions in some, societies, ours until recently, some states probably still in the US of really serious criminals. And movies and the arts, because it's not real. It's just symbolic. It's just imaginary. It's just fantasy, right? Now, what Sade does is say, okay, is there anything goes in literature, or is there still a line where you can't cross when it comes to, you know, pornographic works or violent works? Oh yeah, maybe there is. Maybe we're still going to limit things that are like really excessive because that might have a contagious effect. It might, interfere with people and affect them and lead to copycat behavior, all sorts of things. And Sade goes, all right, I'm going to go there. I'm going to put that on the page. I'm going to put that on the stage. And I'm going to be the first to do so in such a way that I will enter literature through the back door, through this incredible scandal that I'm going to cause. And my work will survive for eternity. People will remember my name or forget my name and just focus on the work. They'll forget me, the author, and just focus on the work. And one of the things that Blanchot points out in his book, L'Autrement et Sade, which you should be able to see there.
Yes.
There's two chapters. The first chapter is called Sade's Reason. So it's just an essay on Sade. He says, like, even if you don't like Sade, it's no shame in that. It's pretty extreme. You should at least respect the scandal that this caused. To have an author locked up almost for his life, 16 years or something in total, to have his books banned, burnt, hidden away, rediscovered, published in the 20th century, and have those publishers put on trial. Bataille was called up on trial at one point to defend the publisher for publishing it. And this is in the 50s, I think. Yeah, in the 50s. So, yeah, respect the scandal. And Lacan in his ethics seminar says, isn't this scandal all the more reason for us to be interested in it? Maybe there is something here that we can learn about the human drives, about desire, about the human condition. And that is what we're going to do. Now, Sade, as you know, was born into this very violent period, the French Revolution. So he saw his fair share of violence. The scaffold, almost copped it himself around the same time as Robespierre, apologies for the pronunciation, copped the chop, and Marat was executed. And one thing Bataille is going to point out is that what's going on in this period is a shift from feudal sovereignty to something different, to a purely subjective sovereignty, where he says, like before, and you see elements of this today, right? You might see the way you look at royal watchers, look at Charles and the rest of them in England. You see the royal carriages and the gold fittings and the beautiful castles and the trumpets and the beautiful gardens, and you go, what you vicariously enjoy the spectacle, this sort of grand, like useless expenditure on one's subjectivity, right? It's, and people will complain about it today, right? A typical left-wing or pragmatic approach would be like, if we stop funding their like lavish, like uselessness, we could fund hospitals, schools, public transports, we could defend ourselves better against enemies. Like what a waste, right? And that's part of what's going on in this revolution. Like at a certain point, as Bataille points out, this vicarious enjoyment of sovereignty through the monarchs and the feudal class became unbearable. They said, stuff it, you're having a great time, we're suffering here, and we've had enough. Yeah, bring out the scaffold, let's get some heads rolling, which is, what they did. And, with capitalism emerging in other parts of the West, it wasn't always with such a spectacular way. But so what happens to this like sort of need to be wasteful or sovereign, this subjective thing? It passes from the objective realm into the subjective realm, into the imaginary, right? And that's where Sade's work fits in from a sociological perspective, according to Bataille. Now, the feudal laws that he represents, or the people in symbolic authority, like the bishop, the prince, the king, the financier, they're not in the actual world. They're just in the mental world. So restrictions are off. You no longer need to go only so far in transgressing normal taboos for this expression of perverse subjectivity. You can just go as far as you want because they're not real. Restrictions are off. And Sade went even further to say, not only am I going to give expression to desires a feudal lord could never get away with, I'm going to give expression to desires that generally absolutely no one wants. That's how Bataille puts it. He had his figures like act out desires and acts that most people are absolutely horrified by. If any of you have read some of Sade's works, for example, the classic 120 Days of Sodom, the back part of this is almost unreadable when all the violence kicks in. The first part starts off kind of mild, titillating, a bit naughty, a bit much. Then the feces comes out. Everybody seems to have a scatological a fetish, and it just keeps building and building and building, and then gradually start building in. Any taboo you can think of gets transgressed. Right? Lacan, in a sense, calls this experimental literature, and also a great failure in terms of a sublimation, like the way Freud describes the artistic process of sublimation. He says the author sacrifices the immediate satisfaction of their drive to give expression to it, transformed into an art form, say a book or a painting or a movie, to which they achieve recognition from the public. What a great film, what a great book. And therefore compensating for all this sacrifice, which gives him access to the initial drive that he renounced in the first place in order to work. What a spectacular failure then Sade's oeuvre is. The guy ends up in jail. 26 years, I think they were. two 13-year periods of incarceration from memory. No, yeah, two 13-year periods of incarceration. So it's 26 years in prison. That's not a lot of recognition, but it does have a success of the underground, a success of the damned, as Lacan puts it in his ethics seminar. And that's what we're going to talk about. Now, one thing that unites Lacan and Bataille on this topic of Sade's work is that they both say, read Blanchot, right? His Sade's Reason essay. And that's precisely what Bataille does in his eroticism book. It's that one from 1957. And he quotes like huge slabs of Blanchot, just block quotes that go for a whole page, and focuses in on Blanchot's notion of apathy, A-P-A-T-H-Y. He says, apathy is the method that Sade's villains, the villains he portrays, use to attain their state of sovereignty. Now, when you think of the word apathy, it has a connotation in English of like, whatever, can't be stuffed, indolence, passivity. That's not how to think of apathy. Think of apathy more as the alpha privative, the A and then pathy, like we think of ahistorical, not historical. Same with apathy, not pathos. Okay, which pathos is he trying to remove? The most important one is probably empathy, right? What stops us from violating somebody else? We feel sorry for them, right? Empathy. Apathy is the negation of empathy. And that is one of the key things that the Sade has his villains act out. Apathy against empathy. As Klosowski put it, a kind of Christian disciple of Bataille. Bataille will sometimes mention Klosowski, but always with the caveat, the Christian Klosowski, to say, there's going to be that sort of bias, if you like, there, that tinge, take it for what it is. But see what he calls it, Sade, my neighbor. Because for Sade, for Klosowski, what Sade is doing is basically negating the love thy neighbor commandment. And as Lacan puts it, Sade refuses to be my neighbor. And that's talking about this notion of apathy. I'm not going to love my neighbor. I'm going to do whatever the hell I want to them, because my main concern as a sovereign subject, a sovereign type, is my pleasure, my enjoyment, my satisfaction. The effect on someone else is outside of me, doesn't concern me. If it gives me pleasure to do it to them, I'm going to do it. That's the sort of logic of the Sadean villains. As Blanchot quotes one of them, apathy, indifference, stoicism, solitude. This is the slow ascetic practice that the villains use and teach to their disciples they try to initiate, male and female, right? In order for them to achieve this state of sovereignty. And they do that by preserving all the energy they use to help others in order to build up in themselves. So I'm not going to waste time caring about how someone else is going. I'm going to use that energy just to build myself up to a state of higher mastery, higher sovereignty, and higher enjoyment, till they've built up an absolute storehouse of energy. And for the villains, like the more experienced ones, for example, the ones that preach to Juliet, this is like one of look how thick the thing is too, right? This is one of the libertine villains of Sade, Juliet, the sadistic sister of Justine, who's more virtuous and I was the victim. That's the sort of die that's going on between them. But Juliet gets scolded for committing crimes out of hot blood, out of passion. And Claire Will says to her, no, you got to do it in cold blood. Don't let passion have any role whatsoever, because it can lead you astray. It's a bit uncontrollable. So be as stoic as you can. Don't be spontaneous. Kill all passion. Be completely apathetic, without pathos. Right? And this is where like Lacan, when you sort of start seeing a kind of asceticism form, right? An ascetic ideal. And this is where Lacan's going to say, reminds me of somebody who is the opposite of Sade, but seems to be preaching the same thing, and that is Immanuel Kant, right? And that's why Lacan's essay on Sade in his Écrit, this big one here, is called Kant with Sade. He's saying there's something that unites the two figures, right? They both reject the passions as pathological, be apathetic, be ascetic, but for completely different reasons, right? A completely different notion of the good, but both of them end up in the same kind of practice of denying the passions. You could argue that they deny different passions, right? But the villains, at least to start with, but the villains end up like deny them all almost. And you see this asceticism continue to grow because for Kant, like passion's going to lead you astray, emotion's going to lead you astray. Any interest whatsoever in the object or in utility, they're going to lead you astray. You've got to be renouncing all that to make sure you attain the good, right? You know, it's no surprise that this moral philosophy is written by a lifelong virgin who took his virginity to the ground as to the grave, which was in the ground. Yeah, so that's the sort of link, one of the many links that Lacan's going to find between Sade and Kant. Now, Blanchot also picks up another interesting aspect of this method of apathy the villains use to achieve their state of sovereignty, right? And it's like a triple negation, a triple threat, right? Number one, negate your fellow man. Why? Yeah, Stephen likes that one. Yeah, he's on board. Why? Because what is man, right? What is this man? What is this human who defines himself as a nothingness before God? Well, then I'm going to take the side of God and say, I'm going to see you as nothing too, right? Negation one. Negation two. Now you can negate this God itself, God himself. Why? Because what is God, this human construct, this figment of the imagination, compared to nature, which is what's real, right? So I'm going to take the side of nature. Stuff God. Stuff fellow man. Stuff God. Now there's just me, the villain, the Sadean villain, and nature. And so the reason why Sade's books are so like thick, right? That's just one story, the story of Juliet, is because the villains will like, you know, in between the sort of sex scenes and the torture scenes, they'll just stop and give these huge disquisitions. It's like defending a thesis or, and it's like, oh God, how long is this one going to go for? Oh no, he's starting to talk, you know. Oh, so is she. And it's like, all right, I'm going to have to skip a few pages. Oh my God, they're still going. Like, and like scholars and readers have complained like for the last, you know, for centuries that it's about 200 years, yeah. Well, he's such a terrible writer, Sade. Like these artlessly stuffed disquisitions constantly chucked in, interrupting the flow of the action. And it's just, you know, and it's so boring. Like these aren't the most viable philosophies, right? Like they rely on all sorts of fallacies that you'd expect first year students to pick up, or you'd be thinking, oh, geez, either they're not very bright, or maybe I should be alerting the authorities, or what's going on here? Maybe they're just philosophy is not for them. And like Blanchot says, like, we're not saying any way whatsoever that these philosophies are viable. And you know, Bataille says that too. Like it's you can't really live without factoring in, you know, your fellow human being, your fellow citizen. You're not really going to get very far, right? But the fact that like Sade goes there and tries is important. And Lacan says like try and get what you can out of them, right? You're finding important clues as to what's going on in the psyche of somebody who is trying to engage this violent material. One thing you learn, for example, is that even Sade himself as author can't bear what he's uncovering. And that's why he has to like take flight into these rationalizations. Oh, I'm just doing this because of that, because of that, because of that, because of that. It's because I'm nature, right? And, you know, I've got these triple negations and like, why would I care about, you know, this person or that person? And it's like, okay, well, why are you like, spending 100 pages of a book trying to convince someone you're about to kill and murder? Like, just do it, get out and done with, right? So there's those sorts of paradoxes going on. And as Klasiowski puts it, what notion of nature are they dealing with? It's a satanized version of nature, often. It's a nature reduced to its most violent aspects. If nature is violent, then why shouldn't I be violent? Since I'm just a part of nature and there's no God. And my fellow man define themselves as nothing in front of this fiction of their imagination. So I'm just going to go with that part of nature. Other times they talk about nature as just random flux, chance. So nothing means anything. So who cares? Like a kind of nihilist version. Other times they'll sort of yeah, so there's going to be many incoherences, but at other times they'll keep God. Like there's one contradictory figure that gets told off by his peers, Saint Fond, the hideous Saint Fond, as Lacan refers to him. If you see what he gets up to, you'll see why. He keeps God, but he kind of puts the problem of evil, back into him. It's like it's not just the God of the good, and then like all the evil happens because there's a devil tricking us. It's like, no, that's God too, that part. Or there's not all this evil happening because he gave us free will and a inconsistent nature, which we've got to show our purity by showing we can never lose faith, so we go to heaven. So no, God's causing that too. It's a God that has the maleficent parts back into him. But at some point, right, this like subordinating themselves to nature just becomes too much. Yeah, and it's like, I'm trying to be the most sovereign I can. That's my desire. Who am I to take orders from nature now? So then they start fantasizing about destroying nature as well, right? That's the third part of the negation. Like you'll see the villains like come up with fantasies like, God, all I can do is like at my best, kind of rape, torture, and murder like hundreds of people a week. That's just, but my imagination like fancies so much more, like stuff nature, like fills me with all these desires that I can't fulfill. Or sometimes it's sexually, it's like, oh, I'm just like worn out from all the like orgies and stuff, and oh God, I still want to go, keep going, but I can't. It's like, damn you, nature, that they even resent the subordination to nature. That's interfering with their quest for ultimate sovereignty. So they start fantasizing about destroying that too, with a couple of like fantasies. One of them is like, if only I could just like grab the sun and use it to torch the entire cosmos, like a blowtorch. That would satisfy me. Then I would have achieved, satisfaction of my perverse drive and sovereignty. Or Juliet starts saying, yeah, no, I thought I was sovereign all these years, but I've been taking orders from nature. But, I think I found a way to like, separate the causes from the effects so that it doesn't really affect me. Like, so there's a sort of absolute notion of free will she starts entertaining, which is actually what Nietzsche accused Kant of doing. The idea that you could have absolute free will and not be influenced by the passions at all in order to be pure and moral, which never works because nature is always going to send its instinctual demands and it's going to creep its way back in there somehow, which is why, Lacan talks about Kant's moral philosophy as a sort of a sacred erotics. He's trying to attain this good, but it eludes his grasp, just like a man pursues a woman, for example, or anyone pursues anyone sexually, but doesn't quite attain their goal. Now, Paul Justine, who is the sister of the sadistic Juliet, which is one of the stories in there, another big, thick one. Unlike Juliet, who like has a couple of sadistic tendencies and then gets initiated, and she's like, okay, cool, maybe we can get away with this and this and this. So they're all giving her the speeches, and she's like, oh, excellent. I can't wait. Goes further and further and further until she becomes as bad as Saint Fond and the others. Justine the opposite. She's the perpetual victim who wants to cling to the good, and she's constantly being abducted, tortured, assaulted sexually, right till the end. So, but both of them, from different perspectives, come up with a classical objection to the villains of who rationalize their behavior. But what if the tables are turned? What if your luck should change? What if some villain gets you in their clutches and wants to torture and rape and murder you slowly causing the most pain possible to prolong it for their enjoyment? Right? The classic objection, as Blanchot puts it. And one villain says, what you've got to realize with apathy is that this hardness we show towards others also involves a hardness towards ourselves. So we wouldn't feel it. We'd be like, torture me. I'm enjoying it. Good on you. So you're enjoying yourself. I'm going to try and beat you, but if I lose, I lose. All right, whatever. So they become like a kind of a, like a soldier who, lives by the sword. They're happy to die by the sword too, right? Or a captain who wants to go down with their ship. And that's how they can sort of like fantasize about destroying the whole of nature, which of course will destroy them, because where they're going to live, destroy the whole cosmos. Okay, that's you too, you know that, right? Unless you can fly off to some other dimension, which you can't. And they're happy to do it. They're happy to go down with the ship. Extraordinary fantasies that get explored there. And another interesting one is Saint Fond, the hideous Saint Fond. He's probably the worst character. He's got many contenders. But they catch him going off with the victims into a room and then coming back and they're crying before he finally like puts them out of their misery. And they say, what are you doing back there, Mr. Fond or Saint Fond? And he goes, all right, I'll tell you, before I finish them off, I get them to sign their souls over to the devil. And then Juliet and Claire will, they just turn on him like, what? How dare you adopt this pathetic superstition of Christianity? Who do you think you are? We thought, you thought you were a badass and, oh my God, you believe that crap? And there's this whole theological struggle as to why he believes it. It's interesting. You sort of trust to turn around and goes like, you're using emotion to argue against hell. Like you don't want to go there. That's your true reason. And they say, no, we're not. We're just saying on scientific materialist principles, right? This is written in the Enlightenment. Sade is reasonably informed, right? As an Enlightenment figure is. And he's like, no, but look, let me tell you, I'm not worried about going to hell. Do you know why? Because I'm going to commit so much crime during my life that by the time I get there, my molecules and my atoms are going to be just as maleficent as the hellfires. So it's just going to be like water in water. It's going to be seamless. I'm not going to feel it. So that's why I think my aim is to commit as much crime as possible and be as evil as possible so that when I go to hell, it will just be like going home, back to mother's bosom. And it's like, yeah, interesting fantasy, right? And these are often like what Lacan refers to as fantasies of the second death, where you don't just want to destroy your victim or your opponent, you want to destroy them in the afterlife as well. So he sees this in Hamlet, for example, where he's not going to kill Claudius, who killed his father and seduced his mother, while he's praying, because he's probably confessing, and that will mean he goes to heaven. Now, wait till he's not confessing. That way, not only will I finish him, but he'll go to hell too for his crime, right? He wants to give him the second death. Or Creon in Sophocles' Antigone. The war was over, Polynices is dead, right? And he goes, you know what, don't bury him. He attacked the city, stuff him, let him rot in the open ground, let the dogs and the birds gnaw his limbs off and scatter him around town. I was like, oh, geez, Creon, chill out, man. The guy's dead. We don't want to smell that for 4 or 6 weeks. It takes that, to complete its processes. And what about the family and the king? He's a relative. But no, he wants that second death, right? That's how much animosity they have. Death is not enough. And it leads to sort of these incoherences. There's one villain who wants to destroy the victim down to the molecular level, to disintegrate the atoms, right? So that they could never be reassembled again, or reconstituted again within nature's processes, as if they're going to have consciousness of what they were before, right? They're not, but they just get caught up in these second death fantasies. Like the first death is not enough. I want to keep inflicting pain. I want to get further and further and further, destroy the whole of nature itself. And then that's the other resentment they have. It's like you just can't destroy nature because anything you destroy is part of its processes. Even if you destroy the whole planet Earth. So what? This planet's being destroyed all the time in the universe. It's got other planets, right? So damn it, that sort of puts a limit on their desires. So they want to go no further. Absolutely, in some ways, ridiculous, not viable, right? So what is Sade? An idiot? Right, getting caught up in these fantasies. And this is what Lacan says something very interesting here. He says, now just hold on a second, right? Sade himself, as an author, is not duped by the fantasies of his villains. He's exploring them. Sometimes he's using them to buffer the crazily perverse and violent things he's like expressing, but that's not his own personal fantasy. His own fantasy is more connected to his life as an author, right? And that's where he's going to produce two schemas in his Count with Sade article. One schema for the villain's fantasy and one schema for his own fantasy. So I'll just do a share screen now and we'll have a little look at how these go. All right, this is schema one. You can all see that, I imagine? Yep. Okay. Now, if you've got absolutely no idea what's going on, it's okay. Zizek, for example, says when he first read this whole essay, he had no idea what was going on until Miller started talking about it. And then, oh yeah, now everything makes sense. Danny Davis, whose scholarship I relied on to get into this, says, look, it's one of his most difficult pieces. There's no doubt about it, and it has many contenders for Lacan. In fact, this essay for the Écrit was actually commissioned for a new edition of Sade's works, but when the editor read it, it was then decommissioned because the editor said, I can't understand this. Like, what the hell's going on in this, like, in this essay? So he's ended up publishing it in Bataille's journal, the Critique Journal, the journal that Bataille founded and edited after the war for, what I mean, almost 20 years. Just under, maybe 15 years. But after Bataille died. So it came out about 9 months after Bataille's death in this journal, continuing on in other form, under somebody who was a kind of in-law connected to his wife, Sylvia Lacan, who was originally Sylvia Bataille. There's a bit of a kind of network going on with them. So it was initially published in this critique journal of Bataille's after Bataille's death. Then he put it out, that was in 1963. Then he put it out in his Écrit, 1966, which was the first time Lacan ever wrote and published anything rather than just speak, which was then transcribed and turned into seminars later by Blair. And it was such a success that he says, my article was then recommissioned by the decommissioner, who thought, okay, now that everyone's getting into it, maybe we can take it back. And it ended up not being the preface, but a postface for later editions. So if you can't understand what's going on here, you're in good company, but I will solve that issue for you right now. Now, let's start off with what Lacan says down here. The lower line, so this is the line here, this diamond S with a line through it, accounts for the order of fantasy insofar as it props up the utopia of desire. Now, the utopia of desire is just saying that that's what fantasy is in a way. It sort of smooths over the possible bumps in the road or negative outcomes you might get. It's like, oh, well, I have desire for this person. So you don't succumb to doubt. You think, oh, it's going to be like this and I'm going to be like that and everything's going to be great and then the marriage is going to be good and we're going to have kids and we're going to, that's the utopia that fantasy creates to buffer the desire. And what it's trying to buffer or support or prop up is that desire is linked to the Oedipal material and the castration complex that it mixes with in our early formation, and in some ways becomes unconscious and is acted out in our object choice and in the way we act to them, in our initial relations with our parents, who are acting their complexes out on you as a child, which means, you sort of continue it on in a certain form, and you're trying to make the cut and not do all the stuff that you found negative in them, but it's extremely difficult. So is everyone else. So we need these little fantasies to prop up our desire so that we can still go for it and get some instinctual satisfaction for ourselves. So usually this formula for fantasy starts here with this S with a line through it, which stands for the split subject. The split or divided subject. Think of a subject that's divided between consciousness, here's my ego, here's me thinking, and unconsciousness, which is all the drives linked up to all these complexes we inherit during our psychosexual development. And then we're looking across this, what he calls the lozenge, which means desire for. I think he gets it from logic, this term, desire for the object A, this prime object. That's my type. That's who I want, right? Object A, which is linked to our early memories. So that's the transference, but not too closely. It's got to be the right distance. If someone reminds you too much of a parent or an early influence, which had mixed feelings, you might resent it and reject it. But there might be something that reminds you of them, but at the right level of subtlety to make that be your type. So that's the neurotic or the split subject, looking at this object of desire, which is supported by fantasy, right? So the neurotic starts from there as its split subject. For example, Hamlet fantasizing about Ophelia. Isn't Ophelia beautiful? Isn't she so, full of ethereal forces? If you have a look at the early film version of with Laurence Olivier, they casted a really nice Ophelia. It's real like sort of Danish princess material. Be hard for Hamlet not to think something like that if it wasn't for his Oedipus and castration complex that Freud and Ernest Jones and Lacan later discuss at length. Now, for the Sadean villain, it's different though. He's going to start at this A. And it's not as if he is the object of desire for the split subject, right? Because no split subject or ordinary subject or neurotic subject is fantasizing about generally being locked up and tortured and murdered. They're victims, not partners anymore. So who are they the object for? They're object for this D. And that's why you see a little arrow going from the D to the A. And that D stands for nature's desire, natural desire, the demands of instinctual nature. So the villain here is the object of nature, not some neurotic, but nature. And this desire fills them up through this process of apathy until they reach this will to jouissance, volonté, for will. And jouissance is sort of like an enjoyment beyond our usual pleasure principles, involving sadomasochism, involving an intensity or duration, which is not like, I think I'll have this wine and this cheese, right? That's pleasure, right? If you're going to like stuff your face and, in an all binge orgy, and, then you're going to jouissance because you're going to be sorry. But sometimes, people can't help themselves. That's the oral drive when it gets beyond the pleasure principle. So these villains fill themselves up through apathy, through opening up to nature, rejecting man, rejecting God, to the state where they can then rain down on their victim, right? Again, using apathy. I don't care about your pain or suffering. It's going to give me pleasure to betray you, to steal from you, to violate you. So I'm going to do it. It's what their logic is. Why? So they can finish up here on the top right, S, as the sovereign subject, the subject of brute pleasure. The pathological subject in Kantian terms, which means Kant is down here as the neurotic subject of practical reason, who wouldn't hurt a fly. I'm not going to do any of that. That's who gets targeted, for example, by Justine. All right? But that's not Sade's fantasy. Sade is not this villain. That's what Lacan's going to say. So let's have a look at where Sade is to become the schema too. Now, this bottom left is still the dominant position of the subject in question, which is Sade. And look, next thing you know, he's actually got a strike through to him too. So he's actually the split subject or the barred subject. Why? Because as an author, just like his victims in Schema 1, he's literally behind bars. He is locked up in prison, first for his sexual escapades, which have scandalous effects, gets him in trouble, and then for his literature that he writes while in prison, which gets him locked up again by his mother-in-law, firstly, his wife's mother, and ultimately by Napoleon, who said, like, who the hell wrote this Justine book? Find him, get him behind bars. Like, I don't want anybody reading this. This is outrageous material, right? So he is literally the barred subject. And what's he doing in prison? He's still opening himself up to the natural desires, but sublimated in the author's desire to produce. And the object right now, up here on the top left, is his immortal works. That's what he wants to be. In the canon, I have achieved author status. I'm in the canon. My works are immortal. They will never be forgotten. Here we are 200 years later, beaming out from Melbourne, discussing these works, which we have variable familiarity with. And what's the result of these works? Like I said, his mother-in-law sees them, Napoleon sees them, right? They are filled themselves with this jouissance beyond the normal pleasure principle, but it's the moral jouissance, the moral force. Like I'm so outraged by, you know, this person's like behavior. I want them dead. I want them killed. I want their books banned. I want them never to see the light again, right? That's the sort of crusading, persecutory, punishing sort of like, it's not for my personal pleasure. It's because they're like a super bad pervert and I've got to get them. So that's what the V is now, right? The moral persecutory force, which gets put behind bars. And why Sade, and what's the outcome of what Sade's doing? He can't actually reach this sort of sovereign state literally himself, though he can in his mind, right? But his readers, his followers, his supporters, like his wife for a time, his manservant, his valet, his lawyer who handled his financial affairs while he was in prison, all the readers and scholars and practitioners today who learn something from Sade's work. You think of all the BDSM like practitioners who you know, don't literally act out the violence literally, but might play act it in various ways. With the cat of nine tails, it doesn't really hurt, just makes a loud noise, right? For sexual pleasure. And the orgies and the swinging and the, you know, even the violation of taboos, like taboo on incest, like is one of the first to just be completely ignored. Which is, you know, illegal and criminal in real life, but there's been an absolute flood of pornography based on simulated incest themes over the last 10 years, which I bumped into actually a retired male porn star at a bar once in Melbourne. And he said he actually took to reading Freud to try and make sense of all this incest porn that was just flooding, because the producers are just doing whatever gets clicks, whatever gets likes, right? Okay, incest porn's in, so they're doing it. Sometimes they'll get into it, but then be disturbed by it, the sort of simulation. Other times they'll not be into it at all. You know, they're just doing it for the money. Yeah, just doing it because it gets clicks. But yeah, this retired figure, whose name I won't mention, yeah, took to reading Freud to make sense of it. Then he also tried Lacan to a secondary source, and it was too much from him. He had no educational background, but at least he had a go. And so that's, again, it's sort of sneaking around sovereignty, where it's like it's subjective, just as it was for Sade, right? The sovereignty that he portrays was subjective. He defends himself in a letter, for example. He's saying, yes, I'm a libertine. I've imagined as far as one can in this area, but I'm no criminal. You know, I don't do the things I imagine. Not a criminal, as he defends himself in one of his letters. And one of the things he sort of does is produce a kind of knowledge of perversity that many scholars, literary figures have said is a kind of precursor to the sexologists that came later, like Kraft Ebing, and to Freud himself, which Lacan saying, he's going to say goes too far. Like he doesn't exactly get as far as Freud. Freud gets us further in the knowledge, even though he's working as a scientist and not as a pornographer, but that's kind of what they're doing down there. So Sade's in prison, and there's a sort of almost like if he wasn't in prison, he'd be able to act out a lot of his sexual desires. Because he can't, because he's in prison, all he can do is meditate on them and try and put them to language. And also he's pissed off. So he's just going to go even further because, you know, he's not going to be able to transgress those limits while, you know, participating in the mores of polite society. He's got a beef. He's got a beef with the world. He's locked up. So it all kind of works towards this author fantasy. He's not his villains, but his villains are a part of his fantasy as an author. Okay, if there's any questions about them later, we'll re-bring them back up during the question time and go through them again. So, what does Bataille have to say about the responses to Sade? Right. He has this chapter on, he has one on the sovereign man, that's the villain, and one on the normal man, right? That's the the mother-in-law, the Napoleon, the typical moral subject or neurotic subject who it's like, oh, what the hell is this? What the hell's going on these pages, right? And he uses an example which Lacan takes up later as well of a Jules Janin who kind of complains vociferously and denounces this work. Is part of the initial scandal around it. And he goes like, you open any page and it's like skulls dashed after an orgy, blood and gizzards everywhere. Like, you know, he's not satisfied until he's like violated every human principle known to humankind, you know. This stuff needs to be eliminated. There's no place anywhere, not even in literature. And this sort of denunciation, as Lacan puts it, gives the work an unsinkable buoyancy that survives. Somehow survives 200 years later. There's the respectable books on the shelf, and then there's the like hidden ones at the back, which are Sade, which you've got to ask at the front desk for. And here they are. Finally, they're out, and they're still now a walk in the park, right? But Bataille is saying that Jules Janin misses something in those types that's very important, which is that we're not talking merely about a mere aberration. We're talking about a fundamental aspect of human desire, the violent aspect. Sure, we try to eliminate, deny it in ourselves and punish those who exhibit it outside of us as much as we can. But we also tend to go too far in doing that because we don't realize how imbricated it is in our human nature and our human drives, which is why you get the most Puritan people end up being sometimes the most violent because they still got to like, you know, they see the violence and they see the perversity and they got to get down and kill them all, right? Till it's all over. So, Bataille's going to say that, you know, Sade's work helps us understand a part of human desire, the violent part, which you can see throughout history. Like he was very interested, Bataille was, in French sociology and ethnography, so an anthropology. So you look at all the rituals throughout history, the savage ones, the human sacrifice, Aztecs, the sacrifices on the Aztec pyramids. They're probably the most well-known example, but you know you'll find others. For example, Aristotle and Herodotus talk about the savage Scythian tribes who, like, after a battle, like to decapitate their opponents, hollow out their skulls, and use it for a drinking vessel for all their future rituals and festivals. I prefer glass myself, but yeah, but Aristotle sort of like makes the typical, like, he overdoes the sort of eliminativist point where he thinks like, but this only happens for people who are insane, were raised badly, beaten up as a child, or they're part of a really savage like tribe that has, you know, it's really barbarian, no philosophy, no letters, no literacy, no. Everyone else can just strive for the good and attain that self-vicinity. Easy peasy, you know, it just takes a bit of effort, a bit of encouragement. And that's all well and good, but you know, even his pupil Alexander still did his fair share of killing, didn't he? Like in all that sort of it was part of a war and part of a purpose, but there's also, you know, some down and dirty work that would have been required on a daily basis. You know, coming back covered in blood and gore, and you know, carrying all these injuries and trying to survive for that 10-year period or however long it was. It's not so easy to eliminate this material, this waste, this evil, right? This transgressive material, this violent material. And we used to have more of an outlet for it before Christian Platonism, like in our rituals, in our festivals, in our arts. So when you see like kind of movements today to try and like purify, make our art or our movies more moral, you know, abolish pornography, make all our movies about inclusivity, you know, DEI, make it woke, you know, as the current terminology is at the moment, used to be political correctness. It's all about trying to, they think they can eliminate more than they actually can and give us no outlet for these drives, and then we're going to be cured. But it's they're not owning up to that aspect of desire enough. And in fact, they can be acting it out inadvertently as they do that, as they take on these abolitionist kind of tendencies, where it's better to sort of structure and limit them in a more knowing way is the basic ethical point that Bataille makes, and so does Lacan. But how Sade produces due knowledge of this stuff is that he comes up with a kind of a dialectic, if you like, or a dynamic between what he calls two heterogeneous parts. Just bring it up here. Maybe this one. You see on the top here, language, and beneath the bar, violence. And he's saying that these are two heterogeneous parts that never mix. It's like when we're engaged in language right now, we're talking, we're participating in all the mores and the prohibitions that distance us from violence, the violence of desire. If we were going to be engaged in violence, we wouldn't be talking. It'd be all this frenzied sort of like activity. And the two never come like close together. They're kind of antipathetic. And he says that what Sade is able to do is get us closer to articulating more of his violence, which is usually silence, than we have before. But because it's impossible to do this fully, at some point you're going to lose consciousness. He still finds all these like paradoxes in Sade's language. Like his language is sometimes in his work that of a victim rather than of a sovereign, because he's been locked up and he's, you know, pretty pissed off about it, as you would be. The rationalizations of violence. We're saying like somebody who was violent in this way probably wouldn't be interested in rationalizing it. They'd just be doing it unthinkingly almost. And then there's a kind of like paradox of like, okay, if you've got no empathy for any other people, who are you trying to communicate with? It's like opening up a club of like people who hate people, let's all get together. It's like, why would you if you hate people? There's going to be people there, right? Or like, or solipsists, let's get together and have a conference. Like, why would you want to if you don't think anyone else is real except for you? You know, this is the Bertrand Russell's counter to a solipsist who approached him once at a party. I'm a solipsist, but I can't understand why other people don't like, you know, see it my way more. If you're a solipsist, there are no other people. What are you talking about, right? So that's why he finds these little paradoxes, nevertheless, in Sade's language. But he still takes an important step in, like, for Bataille, in linking transgression or linking arousal to transgression of the law. Now, transgression of the taboos on animality happen as crime in Sade's work. So, for example, Juliet will talk about as she stole something, she could feel the genital fluids starting to flow, and she was soaking through her clothes. Same when she like set a fire in this poor family's house after they received her and she was a guest. She starts getting really turned on and describing it viscerally, like you know, they're kleptos. They're kleptos. They get off on crime. And it's because there's not sufficient outlet in a way in the Christian era still. For example, like one of Sade's charges was sodomy. Like it's just a joke today to be like arrested for you know, for anal sex. That was one of the things that was still illegal. Derek, did you want to ask a question now, or do you want to wait till the question time? You want to come in now, do you? I'm not sure how we can do that.
Yeah. So I will wait for the question time, but I'm not sure when it's going to start.
Oh, okay. Maybe in 15 minutes. Is that all right? 15 minutes or something like that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Would you prefer longer or shorter or no preference?
Well, whatever suits you.
Okay. Maybe 15 minutes.
Okay.
We'll see how we go. Okay. So Sartre still takes an important step in linking eroticism to transgression of law, but he thinks he can do away with law or taboo at times altogether, as if these aren't still important. So as if he's saying sometimes Sartre does get caught up in the fantasies of his villains. For example, in his famous philosophy of the boudoir, this one, there's a political pamphlet in there where Sade basically takes the do unto others rule and makes it into a perverse thing, like, root unto others, or, do whatever you want unto others, and they can do the same to you. So there's no law, but you can't complain about it either. Like, it's fine. And he gives it a sort of like almost a kind of enlightenment character, as if it's like a Kantian categorical imperative. So he transgresses all these taboos, he uncovers these repressed desires, and it leads literary specialists, even Blanchot perhaps, maybe Breton, Apollinaire, and others to say he's a precursor to Freud, right? His catalogue of perversions in the 120 days anticipates Freud. And Lacan's going to say, don't be stupid. He's going to say, like, not even close. He's going to overstate the case because I think it's responding to the opposite. So he's saying there's so many missed encounters still in Sade. His example is from the famous philosophy of the boudoir, which is kind of like, delightful and charming initiation of a young girl into sort of orgiastic activities. It's a bit saucy, a bit erotic, but done in a cheerful tone until they get to the final scene where the girl's mother turns up to stop it. And then they perform a violent ritual on her, which the daughter, Eugenie, takes part in. And Lacan says, look at the actual signifiers involved, though. Like, no matter how much the frenzy or the violence, and it's pretty extreme, don't forget the signifiers, don't forget the details. They still will reveal something of somebody who's engaged in normal law, language, and logic. So, for example, it's hard to describe this without going too far, but I'll try. But they get the mother and infect her with syphilis through penetration, and then sew her up with a needle, right? And Lacan says, aha, see, even after this violation, they still return to the law. The mother is still prohibited, right? So it's almost like they're going back unconsciously to the fundamental taboo on incest, the first one, when the baby learns, right? Time for weaning, you're on your own, we're going to start the separation. And also, like, the role of the needle, it's like, this is clearly standing in for the phallus. So there's something of Sade's castration complex being acted out there and in the characters. For example, when Eugenie is doing the sewing, she's saying, haha, ma, like, no more brothers and sisters for me, as in there's some kind of sibling rivalry. And revealing for Lacan a fundamental penis envy in the girl. Why? Because the little girl, wants a phallus. She hasn't got one. The mother didn't give her one. She tries to get it from the dad. He can't give her one. Then she says, oh, what if I have a baby? That will be like a substitute, right? A symbolic substitute, like my mum is with their kids. That's the logic. But no, she's too young for that, right? It's physiologically impossible to at the age of 5 when this conflict typically happens. So the mother's lording it with like more kids, more phalluses, also has access to the father's phallus, and this can create envy in the child, which comes up in a lot of the case studies that Freud and Lacan discuss. So this is being referenced here, but unconsciously by Sade, who would have no idea about the castration complex. Now it's linked into the Oedipal complex. No more siblings for me, no more rivals. And then there's the main teacher, Dormans, who is like a classic gynophobe, right? You know, the typical neurotic diet when the little girl can get penis envy, the little boy can get vaginophobia, right? Castration sort of fear. This Dolmans, initiates Eugenie into all things oral, anal, but when it comes to actually penetrating and taking their virginity, he's like, I'm sorry, I can't do it. You have the sort of incredible kind of defect of being a woman, being female. And Eugenie's like, what are you talking about? How dare you? And he's like, no, don't get me wrong. You're extremely beautiful, the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. But that's just like my preference. I'm not as bad as like my friends, who like couldn't even have done anything with you, not even anally or orally, nothing. I'm not that bad, at least. I can still do you anally and have 5 times already in this book. But no, I can't go into the vagina, right? And this structure appears a fair number of times in Sade. For example, in the 120 Days, like there's one villain who like a client at the brothel who shows her front instead of her behind. And the villain's like, oh, wait, what have you done? Like, I'm not going to be able to come for a week until I get that image out of my head. And it's like, oh, geez, mate, like, all right, each to their own. But it appears a lot. It's almost like, so what good is he going to be in helping Eugenie resolve a penis envy if he's still stuck with castration phobia or gynophobia himself? So this stuff is unconsciously happening in the boudoir without Sade knowing it. So he's not really, he may have paved the way for key parts of Freud. I agree with that. Bataille agrees with that. Blanchot agrees with that. It's very right. But the idea that it's already there in Sade is, a furphy. That's what Lacan is going to stress. And he gives some fantastic case studies of, for example, one patient who he cuts up his daughter's his sister's leather sandals into separate leather strips to make something more useful out of them. In other words, because what's a sandal? It's a shoe. It's like a vaginal object, receives the foot as the phallus. Cut it up to turn into something useful, like a phallus, right? Cover over that lack because that gives them phobia, right? Or another one who likes to cut off the braids of girls, right? And you're saying there's always ambiguity in the act. For example, cutting off the braid might be a way of castrating them, saying, you're really a woman. You don't have a phallus. You're not a man. Now you're available, to my desire. But it can be the opposite because the braid grows back, right? So it might be still a way of disavowing the castration. It's like, I'm going to cut it off and then watch it grow back and go, phew, you're not castrated, therefore I'm not threatened either. That's the sort of like a neurotic sort of logic. So the castration can be a taming of castration or retaliation. You castrate me, now I'm going to castrate you. You're trying to cut me, I'm going to cut you instead, right? And we see this not only in Dolmans, who was like, getting ready for his final orgasm. You're like, wait, you do this, you do that, you do that. He wants to make sure that his ejaculate lands in the cuts that he's made in the mother's buttocks with the needle. It has to be perfect, right? It's like, geez, that's pretty precise, right? So what he's doing is taking the active passive kind of function and displacing it into in a sadomasochistic way. And it's actually what he was accused of himself by in one of his earliest sex scandals, of hiring a prostitute or a beggar who said to pay for sexual services and cutting her open with a penknife and pouring wax into the wound. That was the charge. She denied, saying that the cut came from the cat of nine tails, which had which might have had a cutting object at the end of it. But so there's a sense where Sade may have had this in himself, and that's why he keeps repeating all the time in his figures. But he's not fully conscious of it. So he's unconsciously acting out these complexes through his perverse villain's fantasies, which show they're not so free after all. They're still kind of like chained to the initial prohibitions and experiences and phobias and envies and don't quite break free of them because they don't have Freud. That's what Lacan's point is there. But Sade's going to insist, Bataille's going to say, you still pave the way to a consciousness of the desires behind each perversion, better than, say, a Krafft-Ebing sexologist type. He will just list them off mechanistically. This person likes to do this with feces, this person likes to do that with cutting, this person likes to do that with urine, why? something wrong with their brain. You know, you see the quacks in the quackery today who ignore Freudian psychoanalysis have similarly respond to various issues that a subject might have. Oh, it must be genetics. Oh, it must be something neurological. Yeah, take these big pharma like big pills so that like not only so you don't have to think, so I don't have to think, so I can stay in my little quack fantasy land that we don't need to understand desire anymore. So Sade, by talking about these perversions as a passion and trying to communicate them by removing all taboos, gets us closer, right, than the sexologists did, than anyone did before Freud. That's, I think, what Lacan and Bataille between them are going to be able to say. Why? Because he dared to look evil in the face, Bataille puts it. And this is all in his fantastic Literature and Evil collection. This one here. Literature and Evil, also made up of articles initially published in the Critique Journal. And that's where he's got his critical engagement with Sartre in 2 chapters. He's saying Bataille stares evil in the face, right? It gets us closer to understanding these desires. Doesn't retreat. Like, how dare he? How could he? Usually, you know, you get any inkling of this going on in your imagination, you shut it down. And it's like, what a nightmare. I hope I never have that again, right? Maybe we'll try those quackery pills so I don't have to go through it again. But Sade did not retreat. And the reason why the language is so artlessly stuffed at times is because he doesn't start with consciousness and then try to see how am I going to represent the object. He starts with the object, the event of the object and the desire. And, you know, lets language kind of like fall behind and try and catch up to it. And in this, Lacan has to agree. He goes beyond the usual limits of the Freudian thing, the Freudian id, the polymorphous perversity of the drives, the thing which is at the center of all our imaginary and our free associations and our dreams and our behaviors, our symptoms. Sade does get us much closer than usual. For example, much, much, much closer than Sophocles' Antigone, right? Sure, there's an incest thing, but, you know, but her father, Oedipus, didn't know it was his mother. You don't get a graphic description of it where they all know what they're doing and enjoying it, and then tag in the kids or, you know, or just assault them or do whatever, you know. Sade goes there, right? And he gets us closer to the perversity of a thing than anyone before Freud had been able to. But again, Bataille's going to stress that, like, Sade is elusive and inconsistent. Like, you can't really pin him down to any of his villains. Klasowski proves it, says Bataille. You know, there's inconsistencies like in Justine, there's a redemptive ending. Like, once Juliet and Justine reconnect, Juliet hears what happened to Justine and she goes, oh, the poor thing, like, I've lived my whole life in vice. And then Justine gets struck by lightning and she's like, she's been martyred. It's a message. I need to reform too. That's the end of Justine. That's not the end of 120 days. Everyone gets tortured and murdered. And it's not at the end of the new Justine would come out with Juliet later on, because he thought he lost 120 days when the Bastille was stormed because he provoked the crowd. And that's the famous day that the French celebrate today, the storming of the Bastille. Sade had a role in that. So he wrote a more violent version of Justine and stuck it onto Juliet, the new one, the sadistic sister. And at the end, when Justine is only struck by lightning because Juliet heard a story and gone like, oh, I'm not having this prude under my roof. Send her out in the storm and let nature decide, or God decide whether she lives or not. And when she gets struck by lightning, her villain friends, Saint Fon and co, are like, oh, look, the lightning's gone in through the mouth and out through the vagina, but it's left the anus untouched. They all straight away get to like sodomizing the corpse, the burnt corpse, to not let it go to waste, see it as a sign. Well, Juliet masturbates. So there's these inconsistencies, right? Sometimes there's a virtuous redemptive ending. Same with Eugenie de Franval, the story about the father who incestually initiates his daughter and then plots to have the daughter murder the mother. It all comes unstuck, and then, you know, the main villain likes, oh, I've gone wrong, you know, and then he's going to die and says, oh, I confess all my sins and I apologize, you know. Sometimes you get that, sometimes you don't in Sade. Even in the 120 days, the ultimate assault on all dignity, you see in Sade's notes, right, because he never got a chance to go back to it because it was lost. He says, oh, look, I had the prostitute telling the stories. I had her like hear about her sister's death. and express like, oh, the poor thing. That doesn't fit in with their character. I'm going to have to edit that out later. And the other ones he misses where like one of the like really perverse clients at the brothel hires a young virgin to stuff her sex with feces to the point where he completely ruins it, right? And that's how and then he comes after that. That's his like extreme kink. And Sade's narrator is just like talking like anyone would, like, such a shame to see, you know, like this sacred temple desecrated in that way, which should have been preserved for, you know, for more natural, you know, joys and pleasures. And it's like, oh yeah, of course, but like, you know, that doesn't sort of fit in. So like you see those little inconsistencies in Sade, and including, and this comes out in his letters too, where you know, he'll say in some of them, like, what am I? Like, am I a monarchist? Am I a Democrat? I don't know, you tell me. Like, I find it unable to judge. And Bataille says that this what am I can actually be a motto for who Sade is, right? And what he manages to do is disclose some of the most painful truths of the human condition, right? The violent aspect of desire. And he quotes Blanchot saying, in doing this, he's closer to the truth than the normal man who locks the sadistic man up in prison and locks himself up in a cage in his consciousness whenever he has to experience it. Sade gets us closer to the truth as a sadistic man or through sadistic villains in such a way that it modifies the conditions of all understanding. It modifies the foundations of all perception. So we can't look at the same like moral debates of where's the line between, say, free speech and hate speech, acceptable eroticism or unacceptable eroticism, acceptable violence or unacceptable violence. In the same way, once we've gone through this work and had these like effects reading it, we go, okay, I probably was drawing the line on the side of censorship. I didn't really, yeah, I didn't realize. Yeah, that's, you know, it gets us closer to the thing. That's what they're going to say. Bataille and Blanchot, and it's as close as we're going to get as a kind of as a civilization until Freud writes the 3 essays on sexuality in 1905, preceded by the interpretation of dreams, saying, yeah, that foot guy in the sandal isn't just a foot, it isn't just a sandal, and it might not be you know, just that girl you liked from high school. You might be someone a little bit closer to home. So yeah, okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tim, for your presentation. Now, before we throw the meeting open to questions, comments and discussion with Tim, I've a couple of announcements. The first of which is that the next Existential Society lecture discussion will take place on 1 month's time on Saturday, the 5th of April at this time. That's if you're in Australia. Of course, if you're in North America, it'll be the evening before. And John Nowak will be speaking on either or neither, Kierkegaard's ethology and Nietzsche's Übermensch. I'll repeat that. Either or neither, Kierkegaard's ethology and Nietzsche's Übermensch. Now, our meetings are hosted on the Existential Society's Meetup platform, and the Existential Society hosts meetings of other groups every Saturday afternoon at this time. So if you want to have a look at, see the topics and the links, I've put the link to the Existential Society's meetup page in the chat. Now, for the question, comment and discussion section, we'll use the raised hand method, and you'll find the raised hand icon in the React tab at the bottom of your screen. Now, first we have George. Go ahead, George.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna, excuse me, sorry. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna push back a little bit on your thesis, which is to say that I think there's two, I think that one, I want to make two separate but not related points, which is that, my interpretation of Sade is similar to what my interpretation I'm going to offer of Elon Musk, which is to say that, he's living through a period, and he himself is a noble, they're living through a period of progressive awakening. Ultimately, you have the French Revolution, and Sade, I think, is embracing misanthropy, because he hates that the public, he hates the politics of the broader public. So he's adopting a nihilistic, hateful, vicious attitude because, again, he finds that, of course, he cannot reason his position with the public, the idea that the aristocracy and the king, are due deference and should be above the law. He can't argue that. So instead, again, much like Nietzsche, he engages a misanthropic attitude. And again, I think the same thing could be said of Elon Musk, which is to say that the public is broadly denouncing of neoliberalism and the billionaire class. So the response is a kind of reaction formation, to invoke Freud, whereby, again, you're just going to hate the public and you're going to embrace toxicity, misogyny, etc., and so forth. And so that's, I think Sade has to be put in that context, I submit. Now, the other side to this, and I'm going to object to the idea that what Sade is communicating is some kind of trying to bring into the light, our darker desires and passions. And I don't think Sade in any way is discussing or touching upon normal human psychology or normal human sexual desire. Which is not to say that there aren't some individuals out there that are, for lack of a better phrase, ultra sadistic. Of course, Jeffrey Dahmer comes to mind. And so, my point, in cases like that, what I will argue is that you should not philosophize from the exception, right? That, in other words, the vast multitude of human beings have what we would consider to be normal sexual desires, normal fantasies, in other words, consensual processes, things like this, right? Mutual desire, mutual pleasure, mutual desire, right? But again, you do have the Jeffrey Dahmers. The point is that you philosophize, to the extent there's a philosophy there, you philosophize those rare instances separately, right? Instead of saying, well, we have to incorporate Jeffrey Dahmer into our broad philosophizing about sexuality and desire, right? I would reject that supposition. I think you have to look at them in isolation. And so, because in the end, I think this is true of the anti-enlightenment, which Sade is embracing, of course, as Nietzsche, which is to say that human dignity is not a philosophy, is not a metaphysics, but human dignity is simply a politics, right? And so Sade's characters, these very vile, vicious characters, like you said, he's sort of the mirror of Kant, right? Suggesting that Kant's imperative for fairness and truth, right, that is equal to Sade's sadism, right? And murderous impulses in terms of that he describes, obviously not him personally, but that he describes, right? So again, because that's what the anti-enlightenment does. It reduces all men are created equal. It tries to reduce it to a politics, as opposed to saying it is a metaphysical that indeed has shaped human history, right? So I hope my points have been clear to you and that they're speaking directly to your argument. Thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you for the comments. Yeah, like I don't take myself to mean that what Sade uncovers is the essence of our unconscious. I'd say no more than a queer theorist uncovers the essence of, our normal consciousness, right? We're talking about minority currents, which are there. They're there nevertheless, and maybe more than we would have acknowledged otherwise if we stayed in this sort of progressive to idealized kind of Enlightenment vision, whether that of the Enlightenment of Sade's time or that of the sort of neoliberal political correctness, woke ideology, etc., today, like which will sometimes take those minority currents and try to make them, in essence, for the purpose of the good. Say queer theory, for example, they've tried to make an essentialism out of that, which is not. It's an aspect of the psyche. For a minority of the population, it's the majority of their tendencies. But for most people, it's not. Same with the sadistic element that Sade uncovers, right? It's a slender of the human psyche. It's an element. It's not a essence, it's an element. But for some cases, I wasn't familiar with the one that you mentioned, but there's the one
Jeffrey
that...
Dahmer?
Yeah, it was like
You're not familiar with Jeffrey Dahmer?
Serial killer?
He's someone that would, just very briefly, he's someone, and again,
sort of stuff.
an extremely, let me just say this, let me explain them just in case you don't know him. Very, very disturbing case. Disturbing, I mean, to say the least, even for serial killers. He would invite men over to his apartment, poison them, then disembowel them, etc., and eat them. So I mean, again, he's a case of very otherwise a normal mind, representing himself as a normal mind. This is why he was able to lure people to his apartment. But it's a very, very disturbing case to think that that is a human with a normal mind, that these were desires that he was playing out, right? But you know, again, that I would say, thankfully, is such an extreme exception.
Yeah.
You know, that again, I mean, you know, to try to incorporate that into broad philosophy, I mean, you're gonna end up nowhere.
Well, I think a broad philosophy has to incorporate that is an element of the psyche, and that for exceptional cases, it's their majority. Yeah, and I think that's what you know, Bataille, Lacan, and Freud are trying to do here, is just say that like this polymorphous perversity, it's an element of everyone's psyche, but it doesn't have the same fixation or degree in everyone. And Sade tried to go as far as he could. So there's no doubt, to the point where it's not even his own fantasy. It's the fantasy. It's a fictional fantasy. You know, he's like, I don't do this stuff in real life. You know, it's just a fantasy. But it still says something that he can try and articulate this stuff. Gilles de Rais, somebody from his time who was that kind of serial killer and was put on trial, and Bataille writes about him. He'd have like all the kids rounded up, and he'd like slaughter and include them into sacrifice them and have sex with them as part of some like crazy ritual, and then get the servants to mop it up. And then like he got caught, and then gives his testimony where he claims the devil was making him do it and all sorts of stuff like that. But yeah, these cases do crop up and teach us something about an aspect of human desire. And if we're, as you're pointing out correctly, I think, caught in a sort of moment, a cultural moment where there's an over-idealized version of progressiveness, you know, we might want to hit or focus on those violent aspects more than we otherwise would, to sort of like restore the balance a little bit, to say, look, they're there as well, you know, like, look how far we can go, look how far I can go. And however far we can go personally, Sade like is going to keep going way further than that too, because he wants to uncover something new. And you know, here we are discussing him 200 years later. It's you know, plausible that he was, at least to an extent, a great success.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your response. Thank you for your talk today.
Cheers.
Stephen, your turn.
Oh, thank you very much for that talk, Tim. I thought it was a particularly enlightening one. That's perhaps addressed a lot of complexities, which were a bit big for an hour or so. But I was just going to run some things past you in relation to this. I mean, we've got the Sade. Is this just an example of an obsession? And because we can have passions. I mean, when we're talking about most intellectuals that we know, we're talking about people that don't seem to have experienced much passion in their life. They're Boy Scouts, they're choir boys, they've deferred all glory and passion for their heaven, whether it's the Christian one or the social heaven of Marx or something like that. But I look at, Nietzsche's pronouncements upon rationalism. He pointed this out about rationalism, that the rationalist perspective is ultimately everything which is deadening in life. And he saw the unconscious as being the force that enables us to live, that enables us to expand and enables us to have a motive. Now, it's not that I'm in agreement with de Sade. To me, he's just gone on a mad angle as Melda Marcos went with shoes. He got an obsessive compulsive disorder. But I think a lot of people, when they see this subject matter, they're in such horror and fear purely because they're not capable of saying, well, you don't have to go with Sade. De Sade. You can just say, no, I've got my own program. I've got my own choices. But a lot of people who get horrified by this stuff, they seem to think, oh, I have no choices. I must follow what's, the imaginary, fantastic, universal law. So I think the issue here is syndicalism. It's the nature of life. Like the rationalists try to construct this mathematical equation which equals, at the end. The equation comes true, everything equals. And whereas the syndicalists would say, no, it doesn't work like that, or it's more like we have these varying forces, because what are we? We're these individuals, but we're not gods. We're not absolutes in relation to the universe, which is a picture I'm always getting from the rationalists. They all think that they're gods, and they all think that the ideas in their head are the universal truth. But I question this very much. So I think what we're dealing with here is a balance of forces, isn't it? Really. Could you enlighten me on perhaps your views on the syndicalistic nature of these forces? Thank you, Tim.
Just can you clarify? I'm not familiar with that term, that syndicalistic.
Well, for example, you have the idea of the Tao. You have ever seen the Tao image of the two forces which are in struggle with each other?
Yeah.
Well, syndicalism would, at the very least, take on a trinity of forces. For example, it would describe our human world as being one of economic production. Then we have a second level, the social and legal realm. And above that, we have cultural creativity. Now, of course, it makes enormous sense if, for example, you were to bring up a load of legal issues in relation to society. Most people don't want to be killed. Therefore, we have laws against murder, because our society would fall apart if people were allowed to go around freely murdering people. This isn't absolutely true. There is that rare person that likes being killed for some strange reason. But do you see this complexity that everyone, or particularly the Marxists, they think that, the social sphere is the absolute. And I'm saying, no, there's spheres beyond just the social sphere. What Marx says might make sense at a certain social angle, but it absolutely doesn't make sense in terms of spiritual creativity, that level of being. So the Marxists virtually blot out spiritual creativity so that everything must equalise socially. Do you get what I mean from this point? There's different aspects.
Yeah, so there's this issue with the kind of hyper-rational kind of perspective, this hyper-moral rationalist perspective, which thinks we're not still animals, nevertheless, no matter how fancy and great and impressive our ideas actually are. Like you look at sort of modern science and various forms of art, fantastic, yeah. but we are animals nonetheless. And if we don't allow space for that animality, if we repress it too much into the unconscious, it doesn't disappear. It sort of dams up. And someone like Sade is going to give expression to that as far as it can go. And in a sense, it goes back to that sort of Platonic, Socratic sort of idea that our ideas are real and the body and nature and the earth is just nothingness, imaginary. You can just factor that out, you know, like live up in the real, the ideas, these pure ideas. And it's like, yeah, the more we try to do that, the more we bring that other, the more we bring evil into play. And people like Sade are going to express that because they get fed up with it. Yeah, there's no outlet for their perversity, and people who might read it, yeah, might enjoy it because of that, while realizing, oh yeah, he's also going, he's showing where the limit is, because he's gone so far, and it's like, yeah, I'm not going to go that far. It's even like, you know, you got to put the book down. You know, and Bataille said something interesting there. He says, now for the last time, he repeats it like multiple times. He goes, I would rather discuss Sade with people who are horrified by his work than those who aren't. So he thinks there's something fake about those who go, nah, Sade's cool, Sade's great. And like, even one of his figures in his novel From Blue of Noon goes on this rant, like, the surrealists are fake, you know, they think they're Sadeans. How many of them are willing to eat shit, you know? How many of them are really masters? They're all licking the boots of the masters. It's all fake, you know, like, you're supposed to feel the horror. If he didn't find that limit and cross it, he would have considered his experiment as a failure. So yeah, the rejection or the horror is there for a reason. You know, keep it real. No one can tolerate that. You know, Sade's going to make sure of it. However, it does teach us something. It does teach us about where the limit is, and yeah. That other sort of a dynamic you said at the start about rationality being death and the unconscious, the drives being energy or life. That's actually what Bataille sees in William Blake. He's encountered with William Blake in some of his poetry, like Heaven and Hell, where he says evil or energy is life, rationality and the good is just the boundary which contains it. Yeah, so Blake lined up on the side of evil. But sometimes he overdid it when he's sort of poetry about the tigers, you know, like fearful symmetry and couching on the ruddy tide during the French Revolution, like Bataille saying, you know, just it's okay to express this stuff in fantasy, but in reality, you know, you don't want to literally have a revolution as violent as the one that a Sadean villain can entertain, or think we don't need no limits, you know. Oh, don't worry, we'll be made to pay for that if we think we can do without taboo whatsoever. So when we cross the line of taboo, it's usually within other lines. And, you know, there's always a negotiation of where that second line is and when it's okay to cross that first line. Which context, which registers, real life or just fantasy? Fantasy but acted out in real life, like in pretend, or not even that, just fantasy, like literature. Other stuff, yeah, I don't want to see this on a page. Like there's sentences in Sade where you go like, that combination of words should never ever have been strung together in a sentence and inked anywhere. Like it's like, yeah, it shatters you. And like, it's meant to, yeah, it's meant to take you as far as you humanly can in crossing the line.
So for you, reality and ideas are two different things.
Well, Lacan has the notion of the real, to say that reality is usually made up of our ideations of the real, but then we leave a part out, the part connected to our perversity. That's what's repressed and comes back as a return of the repressed as a symptom. And our notions of reality itself can be one of these symptoms, right? That's when we start talking about ideology, competing ideologies, where the claim is that we're the good, then they're behaving very perverse. It sort of happens throughout history, and it's happening again.
Thank you.
Dimitar, it's your turn.
Hello. Thank you much for the presentation, Tim. And I would like you to take you to another room. So I actually just look from a different dimension. I've tried myself to extend as a Tata philosopher, from few to now 21 dimensions of human life. But I would like to simplify these things because myself, I've been growing in, I believe, healthier society, environment, be it Tiamat. Do you know what it is? Dialectical materialism, principles.
Dialectical materialism.
Principles, because it's the principles that matter. It's not about dogmatic, about principles which apply so far to everything in my life, including information science. So the things that I've learned and actually developed myself, so it's not I'm just copying somebody said, despite the limited human scope understanding, we have unlimited deviations, disorders of what we can think of and how can have like a sort of imaginary ideological view of life. That's why Marx was sort of decided to actually simplify that thing, find the real reason of the issues, which were mostly economical, because also if you go back to some interesting books in terms of how the humans from, say, in Australia, very simple tribal communism, simple because it is simple to organize, so they didn't have many problems. But now it's so complex and it's very very hard, like utopia to try to create a sort of communist system, which requires very high maturity when everybody goes in all directions. Particular reason are technology and exploitation of the producers produces all these deviations that the people can hardly agree. And that's why I want to simplify the things actually, rather than taking all these different views, which are all right, in terms of discussing the different dimensions of life. But unless we align, we are just making our lives miserable. So practically, I have some joke that hell is actually inert, because like joke is like that's why nobody came back from from the other life, because nobody wants to come back to these complications. And actually another thing that I trying to research at the moment, I just put the link, not link to the actual movie. There's I can put that later. Naja is actually the most popular animated film, and I was interested in terms of what is behind, what it represents, and some of the, and actually I utilized also the two major Chinese LLMs, which better understand what it is. And interesting thing was that actually integrates Taoist, Buddhist, and Confucian principles. Also quickly, when I asked what is the most influential philosopher, they told me, like one of them told me that Confucius was the most influential in terms of actually guides the most of the Asia, which is majority of the people practically. And the other interesting aspect is that actually it looks at the balance between chaos and order. So, from the point of the self-cultivation and actually bringing something useful in life, rather than discussing endlessly about various possibilities. So it's about collective heroism, unlike Western narratives that are focusing on individual heroes, which means we are just trying to divide and not create useful environment for us to start actually producing something useful, where the major difference with why idealism as a philosophy is not useful is because we can't test those ideology. We can create whatever model we want. Unless we test it, it's useless. So practically that's why, in a way, Marxism has produced something, no matter how bad it looks to some, it's actually functioning, at least for China, and China is practically becoming #1 in the world. So it has some practical sort of outcomes in terms of how we can organize ourselves, because so far the oligarchs control the world. To be able to actually respond to that thing, we need to organize, the people need to organize. And the only way to organize is we have aligned how to say, aligned philosophy principles, because we know that money can dictate everything, and no matter what we call democracy, it's actually dictatorship of the more powerful, and they dictate everything, what comes, media, everything. So there's some different views, like we are living in a technofeudalism because they dictate how, what we can think of. They create the framework of how to think. So yeah, just want to bring another view, and it's interesting to see what different philosophers have thought, but at the end we have to organize ourselves and be more practical, pragmatic, and actually the most important thing is to include everybody, because when we have few people, discussing about something, nothing happens. So we need practical principles that everybody understands. And as a myself, data philosopher, understanding is the most vital thing of everything. We collect, like one example is Google knows everything but understands nothing. So that's useless knowledge. We need to start to apply our knowledge and make sure that our models are actually functioning and bringing the system up rather than making more chaotic as it appears today. Thank you. So you feel.
Thank you for the comments. There's a lot to take in there, but I'll do my best. Technofeudalism is, of course, the thesis of Yanis Varoufakis, who's somebody I followed quite closely with his taking on the EU and the Troika plan to destroy Greece's economy under the pretext of improving it, which was one of those models that are completely useless. And then they acknowledge it later, the IMF, oh, guess he was right. You knew he was right all along. Technofeudalism is an interesting one because so when we are on the internet, in the social media, it might be our time to kind of engage in non-productive expenditure. We're not working now, we're taking a break. But the feudal overlords are working. They're working to see what you like, what you hover on, to try and like convert it into a sale for them. So they want to take the unproductive and absorb it into their notion of utility or productivity, to the point that we're not actually getting any release. We start like being modified to suit the interests of these feudal overlords, and we don't have any time to like just do access our desire for the sake of it, whatever it may be, we don't even know. So that's an issue that Bataille talks about too, that capitalist or consumerist society seems like it's giving us subjective sovereignty, consume, enjoy. But our modes of enjoyment and consumption are also being constrained by the capitalists to their ends. For example, let's take games, right? As an example I use. Like I like sports. You're watching sport, you're watching football, you're watching cricket. Why do you have to see a million KFC and McDonald's ads? Like burgers right in your face, people eating chips, like this horrible junky food that has nothing to do with elite athletic performance, which is what you're trying to enjoy, that divine animality of the human body at its peak. And now, like, you watch it and you feel like eating some junk food from Uber Eats, which is the opposite of what you should be experiencing. Yeah. And it's same with the sort of inclusivity side. It's like, let's get out of the way to like, it's almost ideologically compulsory now in Australia to like say how much you love women in traditional male sports, how it's the same. It's only patriarchy, misogyny that's holding it back. And it's like, or anatomical difference, like we've got different strengths and different weaknesses. That's a natural endowment. Like I'm here trying to enjoy the, divine, the animal body. You're putting this sort of like, woke DEI kind of ideology in my face, and then burgers, like, and you think, oh, geez, I'm not even relaxing. Like this is becoming it's becoming this non-productive time. My leisure time is being absorbed into someone's idea of utility. And that's the problem, right? When we don't get any space to re-access our desire, that's when it dams up and suddenly people are shifting to the alt-right. They're voting for Trump and enjoying his press conferences every morning. You wake up and you hear the latest one, all these like EU technocrats, kissing his butt, this New York, like son of a rich boy, with his obnoxious, boorish like manners. It's entertaining. because we don't really, I like the Trump press conference, as Rick in the comments. It's a guilty pleasure. Yeah, like I'm not going to like all the effects, but it's, you know, it's fun to like watch these fake moralists cop it, and have to kiss butt for a while. For the time being, the consequences will be something else down the line. We'll leave that for an open discussion, but as an open question. Sorry, time will tell. But Marx's Bataille's discussion of communism is in volume 3 of this, the sovereignty volume. I really recommend it. It's a really sustained working out of the notion of sovereignty, what happens under Marxism. Basically, it disappears. There's no room for the subject or for desire. Everything has to be absorbed into the revolution. Everybody has to be equal in order to attain it, and that's the goal. So there's a sort of, a kind of almost a naive idealism that Marx inherits from the Christian Platonic tradition and from the Hegelian idealism, still on its head, but preserving this sort of idealism, which doesn't really allow enough space or knowledge for desire. It's sort of like the weakness of like the unreconstructed Marxists, including my esteemed colleague, as I call him, never met him personally, Yanis Varoufakis, where he'll sometimes get caught up in notions of equality that don't properly accommodate difference. There's a binary of the oppressor and the oppressed, you know, rather than like natural enjoyment of difference between the sexes, which, you know, comes out in sociological data, or between different cultures and different nations. There's not a lot of accommodation of difference, or it's insufficient. And it leads to an austerity where a gap opens up, as Bataille puts it, between what people really do want and what they say they want, what they acknowledge they want in terms of desire, eroticism, contemplation, the beautiful, questioning, free thought. Like this stuff's all waste when you've got a revolution to win to establish the good. Now, it's not as if we shouldn't be trying to improve society, right? Bataille is still a kind of leftist. He's just saying we've got to make sure we're leaving enough space, or structured spaces for outlets of desire, of the drive, and learn something about it, so that when we do come back to politics, praxis, being rational and practical, we don't try to, you know, we're have a bit more know-how of this like dark or evil or wasteful material, so that we don't encroach on that space, so that our, you know, our modes of accessing leisure, you know, or waste like games or the arts become really, you know, constrained again, morally, ideologically, or just as some commercial venture for, you know, some capitalist interest, some moral interest or some capital interest. Their version of utility is being imposed on us. We don't get the release. Next thing you know, Sade seems like fun. He's like reacting against that. He's going as far as you can go, and he might teach you that like where you set the bar of what is a dominant trend or a common trend in human nature is actually was too soon. We're a little bit more perverse than I otherwise thought we are, or that I am personally, or that others are personally, because then you start seeing, oh yeah, that's what's going on here. That explains, like sometimes violence breaks out and like people don't understand it. People vote for like authoritarian, brutal regimes, support them, and people don't understand it. They must be tricked. They must not have all the information. Yeah, I think they're also getting off. Yeah, don't forget that. Like the commenter said, like, you know, you can get off on a far right figure. They give you a kind of parody of the drives. Again, it can be absorbed into some nefarious purpose, and that's why it's good to be aware of the polymorphous perversity of the drives. You know, Sade does it through literature. Freud does it as a, you know, in the sciences. But there's, you know, Sade's still important. Like, you know, I've been reading a scholar, you know, an expert in Freud for like 20 years, right? 25 years I've been like studying psychoanalysis. Sade still opened my eyes like a lot, and that's saying a lot after 2 decades of study and publishing articles and books. I'm like, wow, you know, you can read what Freud says about, say, you know, various perversions or mechanisms. You go, oh, yeah, that's interesting. I guess that's what's going on in that case. And you think, oh, it must be so rare, or it must be something wrong with that guy's brain. And then You read Sade and you're going, oh, actually, yeah, okay. He widens the foundations of perception. Yeah. And you start seeing it in more places or noting it in more places. For example, the recent Nosferatu film made by a fantastic director, Robert Eggers, where he really, like, I've always disliked, had no interest in vampire films. Like, what a crappy fetish, right? I'm going to suck your blood, blah, 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 you know? Sounds like a stupid showbag you buy at, when you're a kid. But he really like linked it to the oral sadistic drive by having the vampire not take blood from the neck, but from the breast. And so when the major heroine sort of feeds the vampire in order to trap him, you know, he's suckling on the mother's breast. Yeah, so you really see the kind of this oral sadism, which is very cannibalistic, right? Taking someone's blood, biting into flesh, kind of playing out in that film, and it's done very successfully. So yes, so economic pragmatism, equality of distribution of resources, the fair go, that's all great. That's all fine. That's what Bataille says, right? But that's only step one. Step two is like, okay, what's all our equality for? What's all our society for? What's our productivity for? What are we going to do with our surplus? Redivest it back into the productive apparatus. That's what the capitalists did. How's that gone for us? Terribly, because then it comes out, you know, in an excessive repressed form, return of the repressed. We've always got to make sure we leave space for us to engage with the evil, right? With the problem of evil, with the dark drive, the transgressive drive, the wasteful drive, you know, the waste. That's the point that but I would like to make, just to complement what the Marxists were trying to do and still try to do to this day.
All right, thank you. Alex, your turn.
Hi, thanks, David. Hope you guys can hear me.
Yes,
thanks,
we
Tim,
can.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim, for the talk. I'm really glad I caught the event. I just saw it earlier today, and but it's timely because we've been revisiting some Bataille in another group, so this is it's very helpful. And I wanted to just bring up a few things that really stood out for me that I found really interesting. The first one was this this triple negation that you talked about, right? Which was kind of like the path to the Sadean sovereignty or whatever. And it was, you know, negating the other human, negating God or the big other, right? And then negating nature as well, which was interesting. And I've just been trying to understand that a little bit more, what that might mean. And the second thing you mentioned was also around almost like a kind of stoic attitude in the midst of this, you know, jouissance or this like excessive pleasure seeking, which really goes beyond pleasure, right? Which seems to be part of the point. And it almost, you know, it makes me want to say, I mean, I heard what you said about, you know, at least for Lacan, like Sade is still way behind Freud in so many ways. Like he is caught up in his own fantasies that he doesn't fully understand. But it does seem like Sade actually gets at the drive, right? Or this death drive, or I think Lacan has different name for it. But that's something that I find fascinating. And I guess the last thing I was trying to kind of piece together was the diagrams that you showed from Lacan. And I was trying to understand, like, is that, especially that first diagram, which shows the path of this, you know, monstrous figure, right? Is that basically those negations that we were talking about? Like, is that a way to understand it? And I'm just wondering if you could say a little bit more about all of this. And you know, the one thing that stands out for me, this idea, I think in Lacan, is very central of, you know, this drive that keeps repeating, that keeps doing the same thing over and over. And it seems like there's no point, right? It's like an end in itself. It doesn't issue in anything else. And And that's the kind of, I mean, for me, I guess that's what I want to call the evil part, right? Like, it's not even evil for the sake of some gain, right? It's just like complete, just like destruction for its own sake. So yeah, so I'm wondering if you could speak maybe to some of that, and maybe a little bit more to that diagram as well. That would be, I mean, I would appreciate that.
Right. Thanks for the comments. I'll see if I can do a share screen. Looks like I can.
Yes.
All right. And I'll get it back up for us. So that's number 2. So number 1 is right here. Okay. So, yep, the triple negation. Yeah. So it starts off by not trying to negate nature, but by opening oneself up to nature, D, to go beyond the pleasure principle and attain this state of drive, this storehouse of drive that's ready to explode. And you know, the Lacanians talk about this notion of the inertia of the drive, where no matter how much we try to repress it, there's an inertia to it. It still comes back. It doesn't have any purpose because it's part of our biology. Maybe it has some evolutionary purpose. For example, being able to kill and copulate, having the desire to do that means we survive, means our genes survive. But of course, the more complicated survival gets, the more we have to dam it up and repress it too. So that's when it becomes excessively or unconsciously destructive. But yeah, but Bataille also talks about this notion that look, it's really paradoxical to sort of find in these villains who start off from the point of view of an utter irresponsibility, lawlessness, and debauchery, and end up in the state of total self-control, like the strictest like discipline you can imagine, and are willing to sacrifice themselves. So there's something very paradoxical about that. Yeah, and the 3 negations are you negate your fellow man for apathy, don't have empathy for them, act it out on them, because they believe in this God story, this idealized version of humanity, which turns away from nature. And even their own concept of God, they're nothing, they define themselves as nothing before the idea. Okay, well, I feel body's nothing, I'll do what I want to it. That's sort of their logic. Then they have a look at this idea of God, this nothing, and so it's a construct, it's a figment of the imagination. What's real is nature. So that's what they're doing. Open myself up to nature as the object of nature. I build up this storehouse of energy beyond normal pleasures. I act it out on this, you know, my fellow human beings, so I don't give a crap. And I maintain my state of sovereignty. But then I don't like being, you know, subordinated to nature. That's because I can't always do it. I can't always get what I want still to this day. So I'm going to try and take nature out as well, fulfilling me with desires that I can't fulfill. Yeah, I get worn out, or, you know, my imagination takes me further and I don't like that limit. So let's just try and take out nature as well, which is what they try and do. They're happy to destroy nature, even if it destroys themselves, because in that moment, they were sovereign. Same with their, you know, if the tables turn and so on, and a villain gets them like on the rack, they're okay with that because, you know, that's their hardness will be sufficient that they won't feel it. Or if they go to hell, they're going to be so evil by the time they get there that it's going to be like watering water. This is the sort of the fantasies that they develop. There was one other interesting point that that you got to, but I forgot to cover it. I forgot what it was. Can you remind me? Was there another point that I haven't touched on that you asked about?
Yeah, I was wondering, just as a follow-up here to the diagram. So, I mean, is it fair to say that where the arrow is leading is, so I know for Lacan, this barred subject is one of the key kind of problematics, right? We're castrated symbolically, we're split.
Yeah, that's right.
And, and we're trying to, in a sense, escape from that state. And it seems like, in a way, that's where the fantasy is getting us, to this probably imaginary, or I don't know what to call the S, but it doesn't have the bar, right? It
Yes,
somehow is
yes.
escaped the cage.
Yeah, that's the fantasy, yeah. Because and that's why they start turning against nature, because they think I'm not actually sovereign, I'm just doing whatever nature tells me. And I can't always get what I want, so I am castrated. So it's the sort of typical fetishist disavowal, as often gets discussed among Lacanian theorists. The disavowing their castration. I am pure nature. I'm retaining my sovereignty. Only the person I'm locking up in the dungeon is a castrated subject, because they're trying to be moral, and I've got them under my grip. And that's kind of what breaks down. And all that's the sort of the fault that gets revealed in these villain fantasies. And the point about the castration, like you're very right to say, like Sade gets us there to the lust, the fundamental passions behind these categories. He's not the sexologist, right? Listing them off, this person likes that, this person likes something else. He talks about the passional desire behind us, which gives us an inkling towards it, about the libido, desire. But he's still pre-Freudian in that, for example, look at this diagram here. This is a case analyzed by Freud of the Austrian painter, Christoph Heisman, I think is his name, where he sort of sells his soul to the devil. It's on the left here. And then the devil comes back, etc. And then it gets revoked in the middle. Mary makes the devil give give his soul back as he's going through this whole drama. Okay, is he anticipating Freud? Look, he's engaging with evil, and that he wants to do evil, and he's trying to resist it, okay, why has the devil got boobs? That's what Freud's going to point out, right? Why has this male devil, you can see it there, have breasts? And he's saying it's because there's a sort of dialectic or a dynamic of castration being acted out in rivalry with his father. And again, it's like the man who when the devil appears as his ordinary man to do this contract with him on the left, why is this man the devil dressed in the clothes that his father's profession was? So they're saying it's not just pure engaging with evil, he's also acting out his neurosis. That's his dad there, right? And when it comes to the devil coming back, obviously he's got the animal signifiers like the horns, right? Horny, there's something about the libido coming back in this demonological projection. And the breasts are because there's this sort of the natural ambivalence between the father and son of accept your castration, don't be a pervert, work, don't waste time, work, And it's like, no, you do it, or no, I don't want to be limited. And so there's this battle for castration where, the young boy might think to be limited in this way by the father, be separated from the mother is to be effeminized in some way. So Freud's saying he takes revenge on his father as a devil by giving the devil the breasts. So it's sort of one of the examples where the ambivalence of castration, where castration metaphorically is that, the father handing on the limit to the son, saying if you want to be an adult, you have to limit yourself in certain ways. You have to embrace a certain level of castration. It's like, no, that would make me a woman. You do it. I'm going to make you the woman. I'm going to give you the breasts. And the other extreme of that is a Schreiber, where he's thinking of the answer is to solve this ambivalence is to actually literally castrate myself. I'm going to become a woman, and I'm going to accept this message to be the castrate and become a woman. And now this whole delusion is stabilized and I can function again. So whether you see in these pathological cases or this non-Sadean artist, or even Sade himself with the sort of climax to the philosophy of the boudoir, with the kind of sewing up of the mother and making sure that the ejaculate lands in the wounds, there's this acting out of the castration complex kind of unconsciously. So he gets us as close as you can get without Freud, is what I'd say about Sade. In his exploration of these perverse passions. But we still need Freud and even Lacan, because the Freudians kind of watered it down pretty quickly too, to say, sort of like the first discussion on the questions, these are just minority currents, hardly anyone has it, just extreme cases. It's only extreme cases have it to that extent, but there is an element of it in every human being. And that's kind of what needs to be acknowledged from time to time through our artistic practices. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. I guess to Lacan, also to, I think, Bataille in his own way. I mean, what Sade is really doing is he's approaching that real with capital R, right? Which is actually a kind of, it's a psychoanalytic real. It's not, atoms and subatomic particles. It's actually certain passions or certain like ways of existing. And Sade gets us in that direction, right, through his own fantastic world.
Yeah, he gets us there much closer than the sexologists who just like list them off of categories and then can't explain what's behind it. They never really can articulate the desire behind each of the perverse categories. Freud can, because he gives us access to the free associations and dreams of the patient, which he interprets, and because he analyzes art and has that sort of really good sense where he can see, for example, that the devil has breasts. First, the devil looks like his father, then the devil has breasts like a woman, and sort of analyze the sort of desire behind that as well. Yeah. Thanks,
Tim.
Stephen, it's your turn.
Yeah, I was just going to say, well, something I noticed with Nietzsche and where he finally got. The point about Nietzsche is he started out as a standard rationalist philosopher and then very rapidly started to change. But his idea of the will to power, to my understanding, is it's not so much a worship of power as people imagine it, as a static state, because this is a thing about rationalism. Its outlook is static. Nietzsche was subtly trying to point out, well, if you ever notice with the whole idea of power and potency, it's all about the build-up of the charge and then the release of the charge. And so Nietzsche's making a claim is that we live for those moments of power. We live for those moments of the release of power. So that's not really us. We're sort of subject to power. We're not made gods by power. We just are a part of its program. Now, when I look at what a lot of people are trying to teach us in society, they're always talking about the deferral of pleasure, for example. The church was telling us, oh, don't avoid pleasure. And then one day when you get to heaven, you'll have all the pleasure you could ever want. And the Marxists, being the other twits that they are, Nietzsche notices, well, you're just carrying on the message of the church. You talk about a material paradise. Just defer your happiness, defer your own being in service to the material socialist workers' paradise that'll come along, and there you can be ecstatic and happy forever. Of course, it's a lie, because the paradise never comes. So I was wondering what you would say about this idea around deferral and yet the building up of the charge in life. Now, the interesting thing, of course, Heidegger speaks a certain opposite to this when he talks about being there. The church taught us all about not being there, deferring being for the paradise to come. Whereas Heidegger turns around and says, well, what about being there?
Yeah.
And this is something lacking in our life, because we're always preaching this paradise to come, whereas obviously to build some things in life, well, we have to practice deferral. But look at today, they're all saying, oh, save your money all your life and never spend it, work till you drop, and then we'll eat your money. You'll die after saving all that money. Never enjoy your money, But they keep on preaching one day you'll arrive at that point and be happy. So here we have the apostles of chastity. They're always teaching deferral. They're always teaching, don't be there, save yourself up for the paradise which I'm controlling, which I'm ruling. So I was just wondering what you'd have to say about that, Tim. Thank you.
No, I think it's a good link that you make between power in the will to power of nature and sovereignty in Bataille, which Bataille is very influenced of Nietzsche, and Bataille uses the notion of sovereignty to critique Marx as basically getting caught up in an asceticism of deferring pleasure to the point where you no longer know what the pleasures are or the passions are. They've been lost. And this would have been the case even if Marxism was tried where it was supposed to be tried according to Marxist theory, which was in an advanced bourgeois nation, because Marx is still before Nietzsche and Freud, right? He's more ignorant of the passions than Sade is, who's pretty good, gets us pretty close. But you still see that sort of deferral. You see that in Marx, obviously, it's like deny now, you'll be free later, right? When the revolution happens. If the revolution becomes perpetual, okay, deny now, the worker of the future will be free, right? So there's always this sort of promise of pleasure later, even in this sort of austere practice. And it's even there in Kant, like Lacan points out that Kant has to acknowledge that he needs the three postulates of Christianity: the idea of an immortal soul, and that you go to heaven after you die, if you succeed in renouncing all your passions and going beyond utility, which is the third point, have no interest in any objects. And Kant has to acknowledge that there's no motivation to do this unless you get that pleasure at some point. Yeah, so and it's the same with the Marxist revolution. There's no motivation to do it unless you get that sort of utopia at some point, which you don't, and you especially don't in where it was tried, which was Russia and China, because they weren't advanced, productive bourgeois economies. They were feudal economies. And so they had to engage in the very primitive accumulation, everything for the productive apparatus, everything renounced to produce, that England first imposed on its population, which Marx was writing at the time of and was seeing the horrors of. So he said, communism's not going to work in a peasant society. Whenever they've tried, it's ended up with the crudest kind of asceticism and austerity and leveling sort of notions of equality that don't account for difference, that don't account for desire, even by his standards. Like Marx is no slouch, right? He doesn't have the whole story on desire before Nietzsche and Freud, but he's not as bad as, what the kind of communists tried in actual history, who weren't part of an advanced society. But the notion of will to power of being there, look, at some point, we need to get that release now, or else our so-called, we have to be there in that moment of discharge now, or else our so-called rational plans are going to start getting perverse without us knowing. For example, it's a rational thing to provide energy security. It's not a rational thing to drill, baby, drill, and get off on burning fossil fuels and ignoring climate change. If climate scientists are saying, no, this is real, we need to switch now. So-called rational plans start becoming perverse and threaten the species as a whole, destroying the whole of nature. That can be one example. Another example is that the Stalinist gulag, some of the purges, it probably starts resembling things that the Sadean villain might fantasize about, killing and murdering and torturing and castrating all these people, even though it's supposed to all be about productivity. Or the Christian Crusades and Inquisitions. It's all about establishing the good. We're just going to have to murder all these other people. We're going to have to torture those ones because I'm sure they had a dark thought somewhere. I'm sure that person's a witch and that person's a heretic and that person doesn't have the exact same interpretation of God as us. So devil's got them. We need to torture and kill them too. So we need to allow that space. The Marxists need to do more there. The Christians need to do more. The capitalists need to do more there. Try to absorb everything into a commercial interest. And there's someone else also needs to do more there. Sartre, which is what I began with. Bataille saying even Sartre is not consistent on this, and he started arguing for the Stalinist view of art to reduce it to the revolutionary purpose, which is becoming tiresome to everyone. And well, strictly speaking, not really a view that Sartre himself had. You see at other points, you say, we can't just turn into a society of ants in order to negate, consumerism and waste. There still needs to be some freedom there. So yeah, it's a sort of paradox that we all have to contend with.
Thank you.
Thanks. Ellie.
Elle, your turn.
Or Al, sorry.
Thank you, no worries. Yeah, I was just thinking about what you said. I did put in the chat a link on Technofeudalism as the Technofeudalists, billionaires or wannabe billionaires define it. And they talk about of course, many people who go into computers, not everyone obviously, but there's a kind of can be an antisocial, no offense to autism either, but like just this blank lack of capacity to, I don't want to stereotype about any condition, but I'm going to stereotype about Zuckerberg and Musk and the Airbnb dude who just joined them. That there's this perception in that video, and I would have thought it was conspiracy theory, but every evil thing I can think of is happening right now, so I don't think of it as conspiracy anymore. Oh, we're recorded. Okay, I'll shut up. Anyway, you can look at the link. I just think that I think maybe some people were actually naive and it wasn't necessarily entirely intentional, like if we're picking the team that we want to win and we like to see this as entertainment. I think when people's lives are impacted, there has been some shift, but it's just too late. And I also don't know, like it was interesting when you're talking about nature, a person appointed to oh my gosh, appointed to a very big environmental position around forests is a forest big multimillionaire, I think multimillionaire, like basically in forest industry. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. But the main thing is that I don't know what people can really do to stop any of this, because they're not just talking, if you believe that video, they're not just talking about the US, they're talking about everywhere, just a really new world order. And when you see it happening, I just don't know. But I also had this experience where I was saying, hey, our power grid is no longer intact because many linemen got fired. So when the grid goes down, we just had a really bad storm. Who's going to pick it up? And then I saw that, Democrats were fretting about that, but I haven't seen them do anything practical to respond to it. And as well as Ed mentioned it elsewhere, like the attrition or firing of nuclear staff and Superfund site staff. So I talked with someone and I said, I'm on edge being here. Like I used to love the area, but I don't want to be here now. And the response was really incredible. They said, you're weird. You don't have, like, don't want to talk with you. And I was like, when the sky is falling, what this community does is walk on their hands so they don't have to see it. I just don't know how, like, reality is even absorbed. But I do think that that I don't know that there is really anything that can stop any of this. And they're not, if there's this much aggression, I don't think there's really much stopping. And my worldview is very different than others, I'm sure, like in this community and elsewhere. But the speaker talking about technocrats, computer folks taking over would be considered a weirdo here too. I just want to let you know. So I don't know. For what that's worth, I thought it was an interesting link, and yeah, I like to think I'm oblivious enough not to be influenced by a lot of ads that I get on social media, but I think that's the way to go. So anyway, there you have.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. The thing with the techno-feudalists, it's like if you haven't got much discretionary spending, you might not be that influenced of any ad because you've got no money to buy anything, so you don't give a crap. But they're still working to modify your behavior by choosing what to put in your feed. Like when we go, like the biggest like con of Facebook is to call the feed page the home page. That's not your home. That's Zuckerberg's home, right? You're going into his lounge room when you press on that. And you think about it, it's not random what the first thing you see on your screen or the second thing or the third thing. It doesn't have to be an ad. The ad might be the second or the third thing, right? But there's literally thousands of things they can choose from. Why did they choose that one thing? It's not random. They're monitoring your behavior and trying to influence it and trying to read it, saying, look how much I get you. Look how like I saw you, I heard you have a conversation, and we picked it up on the phone, or we got a word out of your email, or I saw you like something. You must be thinking this, and it's sort of probably all done with AI too. It's like they're trying to be your like armchair psychologist, and they're freaking hopeless. Like if you just, and the thing is like sometimes when we go onto social media, it's because like we need a break and just like what I like, and they're working on you. It's not a break. It's like it's kind of like a battle zone in a way, where they're trying to impose their will, their interpretation on you, to earn your trust, so that they can then like sell you as a commodity to advertisers, or make you adhere of an ideology that suits their commercial interest. Whether it's on the right, with Trump anti-woke, or on the left, neoliberal pro-woke. Notice how they all like Zuckerberg switch sides. They're all very practical in that. Bezos Musk took over X in order to push his far right ideology. Yeah, but there's sort of no rest there. So I think Varoufakis' key term of behavior modification is the sort of the essence of these media, these internet platforms, is the one that I try to think of. Sometimes it's just offensive, like they say I'm researching these topics and they'll just make an assumption, and I can see it in the stupid crap they put in my feed. And so whatever stupid dumb algorithm like decided that, they've never read philosophy, they've never read psychoanalysis, they know nothing of my work, of Bataille's work, of Freud's work. Like, just piss off. Like, let me see what my friends are posting. I've got interesting friends from all around the world. Like, why do I have to like search them out specifically to see what they're posting? No, I've got to see all these crappy sort of like culture war sort of posts, or these this other garbage. And yeah, so that's the sort of the caricature of sovereignty that the bourgeois, the capitalist world gives us, that Bataille talks about. There's this illusion that you're free and you can just look at whatever you want, and when you go to, there's somebody controlling what you see, really, really specifically, and really like manipulatively. So and it's not to say like you still can't have your fun on the social media, but you sort of have to like monitor their monitoring to make sure whether it really does speak to your desire. And to re-access your desire, sometimes you just gotta put the thing down, switch the thing off and pick up a book. But I spent all these years writing this thing, right? Pick up the book, read the book. There's no ads in a book, no ads whatsoever. There's no likes. It's just you and your thought, and you get to uncover your desire. Read Freud's 3 essays, read some of his case studies, look at some art that hasn't been reduced to a pre-given purpose. Like, for example, one professor took over a department somewhere. I'll leave it nameless, but their mission statement to announce their new presidency or rule was like, we believe that art should be about including minority and diverse voices, you know, on sex, gender, race, and ethnicity, and class. But class is always hidden, right? Because, you know, Marx is too real for the workers. It's more about moral wash of the fact that their class exploitation is still going on. And it's like, oh, that's not what art is about. Like, you know, it shouldn't just go out of its way to be transgressive for no reason, but it shouldn't be like trying to produce an improved version of the New Testament. You know, we need an outlet for our stuff that's amoral or that's waste, for that part of our desire we don't want to acknowledge. And that's what brings the Marquis de Sades, like you know, abominable literature back into play. It's like, well, how much have I been foreclosed from myself? How much have you been foreclosed from yourself? And once it's uncovered, like Lacan says, it's like, it's about squaring accounts with your desire. These fantasies expect nothing of you in the real world. It's not happening in the real world. It's just in your imagination as you read it. But it's about squaring your accounts, your desire, and understanding it. If there's an outlet for it, that's sublimated and respects the rule of law, etc., search it out and you find it. If there's not, you reject it and limit it as best you can. And that's the ethics of this project of psychoanalysis and of philosophy, ethics of desire. All right, I see Stephen's coming in for a second. I can also hear my voice starting to frog up. So I might have to end the discussion very shortly. Do you want to just make a quick point, Stephen, and I'll give a quick answer, then Ellie too, and we'll leave it there. Is that right, David?
That's quite all right, yes.
Okay, it's 4:30, so just a quick point, Stephen. I'll give you a quick answer, then
yeah, well, I felt there's a lot of this subject matter is presented to us, say, in a muted form in something like the film, and I'm wondering if you've seen it, the movie Zardoz, John Borman, 1974.
I haven't seen it. I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it. Is that
Okay.
with Sean Connery?
Yes.
All right,
Sean
I'll check it out.
Connery, world conqueror, you know, Mr. Universe, bare-chested, red
Yeah,
loincloth, hooker boots, riding around on horseback with a gun to conquer the world.
Yeah. Sounds like a fun weekend. There's your representation of sovereignty. It's a fantasy, it's a joke, but you know, you might get some vicarious satisfaction in something like that. I'll check out the film there. That sounds interesting. Al, final quick point before my voice dies.
Go ahead, El.
Thank you. Yes. So I just wanted to make one last point, and I had never involved myself with Facebook. If folks haven't seen the movie on how they track you, it's horrifying, by the way. But it's out there if that's helpful. But anyway, I did want to say that I had never really been involved with Facebook, and I kind of have been repulsed by social media, but with lockdown and then ongoing quarantine for me and people and other people in my situation, we found these social media communities to be extremely powerful, helpful, resource sharing. It was actually the vision that Facebook supposedly had when they started it, that communities would come together. And I would say life-saving, like we, you know, share information, how to get resources for the information about like bird flu in your county, and you know, how to get vaccines, and or if they're available, and just all of these ways in which many people disenfranchised globally have come together in a few of these groups and really helped each other. So I don't, and now there's a lot of struggle because no one wants to be there because of the, you know, everything. But it's very hard to find relocation. So it's almost like a trap in prison in a way. Like, they kind of dominated, and there hasn't been, you know, I don't know where MySpace is these days, but I'm sure some of us would like to go back to those days. But anyway, if there are very innovative techno people who actually want to create a space that isn't antisocial, corrupt, and murderous, that would be awesome. So anyway, yeah, thanks.
As long as it's nicely structured so people don't go acting it out in real life. But you're very right to talk about net neutrality was gradually abandoned, and media comms theorists I've taught in media studies, media and communication studies, use Habermas's notion of the public sphere and refeudalization to actually discuss it. I don't know if Varoufakis is aware of it, and that's where he got his idea from. But when initially the Enlightenment happened and there was the free printing press and the salons would all discuss ideas openly, and then it gradually, and then the bourgeois took over, that got rid of the feudal overlords, and then after a while the bourgeois got big enough to start monopolizing the public space, and then it got privatized again. And these media comm theorists are saying that's basically what happened to the internet and social media. And you can still find those places. I'm still on it. But yeah, you sort of have to struggle to find and connect with the good sources and the good people. Sort of think about it before going on. What am I going on there for? What am I not going on there for? But yeah, it formed a sort of habit because there was lockdown, where that's all we had to communicate socially. And then there was like, in Australia, especially in a lot of the Western world, basically a per capita recession. The austerity of like housing being so terrible that we've got no money to like spend on stuff. Insurance being so expensive that big cool venues and businesses can't stay open. So again, and then we're left to social media as our only way of being social, which is being refeudalized or has been refeudalized by the Technofeudalists. So therein lieth the problem, but we struggle on. We all still made it here, and now we have access to all these books, and we can post something from them online and try and disturb the matrix. Darlene has come in. My voice is dying. All right, Darlene, would you like to quickly make a point before I
go ahead,
fall
Darlene?
into a heap? Hi.
I was just gonna say that I had already kind of developed my own theory that people will do this thing where it's like, you can't reject me if I reject you first. So like whenever, like in a common thing, it's like if you even suspect somebody's gonna break up with you, you hurry up and do something to sabotage it. So it's like, or you break up with them or something. But like in this violence thing, imagining that you're, at the top of the triangle and you're scapegoating or sacrificing somebody else, it's like you're making it so that you can be the rejecter. It's like the ultimate level of a self-rejection issue.
Yeah, so
what do you think of that?
Yeah, so the need to sort of like inflate oneself into this master position is through fear that somebody's going to do it to you. Yeah, so you're like, you go out to a bar to meet someone, and everyone's just going out of their way to like reject everyone before they've even said hello. It's like, why even go out? Like, why did I even go out? If that's what like everyone's going to be like. It's that insecurity where people have been disappointed in the past and so they're never going to be in that position again. They're always going to be the rejecter. Yeah, so it's interesting that Sade takes that further with his villains. And Justine says, what if somebody like still gets on top of you? They never will, because I spent all my time just being selfish. But still, there might be somebody who's better at it than you. That's okay, because through my hardness, I won't even feel it, or I'm so evil, even hell won't burn. Yeah, so that's the sort of this disavowal of castration is being kind of acted out and taken to an extreme, and even it's not a viable philosophy, it's a fantasy, but you can see when you see this behavior among people interpersonally, and you think, why not go as far as Sade if you're going to be like that? Why not go as far as a Sadean villain? Just open yourself up and say hi to somebody occasionally, have a conversation. You never know your luck in the big smoke. Okay, thanks, Darlene. My voice is finished, and I appreciate all the comments. I've got a good chat here as well. I wonder if I can download it and read it. I think I probably can. And save chat. Yep, I'll do that. So I can read your comments. I hope you've left me some links so I can maybe get in contact as well if I need to or can or want to. David, I should hand back to you to give the closing ceremony.
Well, thank you, Tim. That was That was terrific. And thanks for lasting this long. Yes, great.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.